teenage mother on steroids, demanding he start studying for medical school since he was in the cradle. So he was raised in Bayside, Queens, and his parents claimed he was the kind of kid who could never sit still. He'd always had a problem as well with sleep since day one, and throughout his entire life he suffered from severe insomnia. There was very accurate, very correct. Not much was embellished. If anything, they actually had to downplay some of his stories, which says a lot. But the personal life was really correct. But the business side and the way that he'd actually illegally did things, not so much. But it's difficult in 3 hours to describe, fraud, stocks, and so we're going to be discussing that and some of the fun stories too. If you call this fun, I guess. Fun because it's different than all my other true crime stories, so it's just a nice pace of change, So as for his personal life, just because he's on Wall Street doesn't mean things went crazy right away. Slowly, things did ramp up in his life, though, as he was exposed to more and more things. Here he is now on Wall Street and seemingly starting off things quite well, which is interesting because his background in finance was very limited other than slinging ice, but he was a great talker and fearless. He'd kind of mimicked and modeled himself after his hero, Gordon Gekko, the ruthless corporate raider in Wall Street, his favorite film, and assumed what he called the man's devilish alter ego from the film. So Jordan said he believes in total immersion, and that if you want to be rich, you have to reprogram your brain, your mind to be rich. You have to unlearn all the thoughts that were making you poor and replace them with new thoughts, rich thoughts. So he embodied it. He dressed the part, acted the part, and got his first taste of money on his new job and was hooked. He said his whole life, his insomnia was the symptom of not having enough, and now feeling what it was like to have money made it so much worse. Here is where he met Mark Hanna, who was a senior broker at the Rothschild firm, and he'd introduced him to this life of excess and debauchery, really, that one day Jordan would make as a staple in his workplace. Mark had told Jordan that the key to success was masturbating, cocaine, and hookers, in addition to making your customers reinvest their winnings so that you can collect the commissions. What an odd guy. So this was kind of his role model. It really was. But he was actually laid off from this firm after they'd experienced financial difficulties related to the Black Monday stock crash of '87. So a few years later, Danny Porish met Jordan Belfort. If you've seen the movie, Danny is played by Jonah Hill, guy with the weird teeth. So Danny had actually met Jordan through his wife, who had met Belfort on the bus during her daily commute to the city. She said that Belfort always gave up his seat for her, and she thought he was quite nice, and learned soon that he was living in the same building as her. So she'd introduced her husband to him, figuring that Jordan might be able to help Danny with his struggling private business. And after just one conversation with Jordan, Danny came home to his years at Stratton, he'd kind of developed this lifestyle that was very intense. It consisted of lavish parties and intensive use of recreational drugs, especially methaqualone, sold under the brand name Quaaludes. This resulted in a really intense addiction for him that I feel like sometimes the movie kind of, it didn't glorify it, but it definitely didn't, maybe I just haven't seen it in a while, but we'll kind of go over how intense and bad it really was for him and everyone around him. And this was really his drug of choice, much more than anything else that was conveyed. Quaalude was really his vice. So basically, Quaalude was something that was between a sleeping pill and a sedative that was prescribed predominantly to housewives in the 1960s. Most sedatives are designed to kind of make you conk out around 15 minutes. But people soon realized with Quaaludes that if you tried to push through that time limit, that you could get very high. So that happened a lot, and the pills ended up, because it was like very intense, they stopped being manufactured after people sort of started to abuse this intensely, especially because they were kind of addictive. So they stopped being manufactured after 1982, but people still made them underground, or they existed in expired stockpiles that certain doctors would sell off, and then you'd get even more high. So there are a lot of stories about this, which we will get into a bit later, but let's continue with the story. So his work life created this very lavish lifestyle for him, as Stratton Oakmont at one point was incredibly successful. They employed over 1,000 stockbrokers and was involved in stock issues totaling more than $1 billion, including being behind the initial public offering for the footwear company Steve Madden, as the co-founder Danny and him were close childhood friends. And again, everything you've seen in the movies was fairly accurate. In fact, Jordan said they had to downplay a lot of it. I won't tell all the stories, obviously. You can poke around if you want to see some of them. But for those of you who don't know, or just want to get some tingles, they had complete use of illegal drugs within their workplace. It wasn't even a question. Not a big deal. They had sex workers in the workplace spare time. I'm not going to talk about his bachelor party, but let me just tell you, you can Google it. Basically, the movie's all real. And they really kind of deemed themselves these masters of the universe type of people. That's kind of how they lived, right? Recklessly untouchable. They didn't care. And Jordan would give these motivational speakers to his saw his vehicle. Jordan was too belligerent to notice anything, and they'd ran him upstairs, tucked him into bed, closed his eyes, and said, "Shh, Mr. Belfort, nothing, just don't say anything." And he was like, okay. A few moments later, the police had arrived and asked if he'd left or if he'd driven his vehicle, and I'm assuming he said yes, as he was then arrested and brought to jail. When he'd kind of come to and woken up, as he said that this drug, I suppose, had kind of had it where you woke up and you were just sober, and he'd looked around and was like, sustainable form of success. 95% of the business was legitimate. It was all brokerage firm issues. It was all legitimate and nothing to do with liquidating stocks. Federal prosecutors and SEC officials involved in the case, however, said that Stratton was not a real Wall Street firm. business ethics and learning from his mistakes in the 1990s. So, honorable mentions for this story. So, there are many people that were affected by this. Obviously,